Good evening and welcome to TVG's Legends. Tonight's guest is trainer Dwayne Lukas. The Wisconsin native dabbled in horse racing as a kid and in the summers when he wasn't teaching or coaching basketball. After a particularly productive summer at the track, he decided he could make a better living as a trainer than he could as a teacher and coach. So he moved to Oklahoma and took the quarter horse world by storm, training 23 champions. In 1978, with a nudge from son Jeff, he switched to thoroughbreds full-time. The results? 24 more champions, 18 Breeders' Cup winners, 13 Triple Crown victories, and on and on and on. Simply put, he's the man that the man on the street knows when the subject turns to horse racing. Simon Bray made the trip to Wayne's World in Louisville to chat with the man they still call Coach.
Let's go back to where it all started. You were a little boy in Wisconsin growing up. And from what I read, Queenie, a gift from your parents, the pony.
Not really totally a gift,
really?
Simon. No, I got a cash advance.
Oh.
I had to earn it myself. I paid for it. My dad was picked up the bulk milk from the farms. It's a farming community, dairy community, potato farming area at 8,000 people. Mm-hmm. And he would go around and pick up the bulk milk from the farms and take it to the creamery. And what I would do is on every Sunday, I would run up the Milwaukee Journal up to the house and sell them the Sunday paper. Not the daily paper, but the Sunday paper. And for that, I made like $1 or something a week. And so it took me quite a few weeks to pay for it, but that started it all.
And you get Queenie, she's a pony, you start riding, and from what I understand, she was your first recognized winner, correct? When you were 16, did you enter in the county fair?
Yeah. We actually ran her. They used to have, you know, they were grade horses, and they had some thoroughbred horses, but they had what they called the 14 hands and under and the 14 hands and over. So if you had a pony which was 14 hands and under, which she was, then you ran in those races, and they were usually about a half mile and so forth. But that, you know, that fueled the fire.
Out of all the champions you've trained, both thoroughbred and in the quarter horses, you've said Dash for Cash was probably one of the best you've trained of any breed. Would that be correct?
Might be the best horse, pound for pound. And that's saying a lot because, you know, we talked about some great ones. The thing that made him so special was I never, ever thought that I could get him beat. Now that's something, when you trained horses and you know, every time he was in the gate, I never thought they could beat him. And
he instilled that much confidence.
And they didn't. When I had him, he never got beat.
Your immediate impact in the thoroughbred industry, you started going to the sales. Would it be correct to say Terlingua, probably one of the first early influences that put you on the map on the thoroughbred scale?
Right. Well, the thing I think, Simon, that made the biggest splash was Terlingua not only jumps up and wins the nursery and a maiden out, so they said, well, this quarter horse cowboy's crazy. But then we got Effervescing rolling. And Effervescing won 2 grade 1s at Hollywood Park in 4 days. He won the American Handicap and the Citation Handicap in 4 days. I ran him on the grass 1 1/8 miles, and he won, and I wheeled him back on 4th of July in the American Handicap, and he won that race. Well, when Terlingua won the nursery, and then ultimately the Lassie, and then ultimately the juvenile, she beat the colts. And Effervescing the same week won 2 grade 1s, grass, dirt, in 4 days. Suddenly, we drew attention to the barn, big time.
Then along comes Landaluce, who's probably, I mean, one of the best 2-year-old fillies that I've ever seen. That must have been an amazing part to your early thoroughbred career.
The Lassie Stakes, when you see that on film, it is such a treat. And, you know, there was a nice field. There were some stakes winners in there, some of the, you know, lesser stakes leading up to it and everything. And if you watch that film, Simon, and you see those horses coming around, when you stop the film, they're right there together. And then if you hold it there and I say, Simon, which one of these horses won this race? You'd probably say any one of them. You know, everybody's got a shot from here. You punch the button, send the camera going. She opens up 21 lengths to the wire on the field.
Landaluce just galloping by 12 lengths. Landaluce all by herself. Landaluce is the winner by 15 lengths.
When it hits the wire, the camera stays frozen, and you wait, and you wait, and you wait, and then all of a sudden, whoosh, here comes the whole field.
Now we move into the 80s and clientele. Let's talk about the clientele for a second. Eugene Klein, you team up with him, former owner of the San Diego Chargers. And that's been a theme with you and probably many successful trainers, that you've got to have that one big client in your barn. He was one of the first major ones, correct?
Yeah, the nice thing about Gene Klein is that he owned a football team. And people that own professional sports teams have the right mentality to really do well in racing. They understand winning and losing. They understand the draft system. They understand that not every player they sign is going to play, and that some of them are going to get hurt. And so when you get a Gene Klein or a George Steinbrenner, or people that are in that arena, they make excellent clientele. Not only that, they love the competition, and their adrenaline flows at a different level, and so they get into it. And Gene was ideal for me because I was pushing the envelope, hell bent to get after it. And Gene just gave us the wheelbase to get into the sale ring. So we were able to go in there, and I was able to buy Simon the horses that I liked. And we dwelt not so much on those brilliant pedigree pages that they kept throwing up on the screen, but on horses that looked like racehorses, and it worked.
I used to watch you at the sales when I was a young kid coming over here to the States.
Now, we're not that far apart.
I mean, the joke was always around with some of the trainers I worked for, what would it take to buy Wayne Lucas's catalog with his notes in?
Yeah.
I mean, you had this fancy Lucas rating system, if you will. What did that involve? Did it involve just looks and gradings?
Well, when the movie came out, 10,
okay.
with Bo Derek. Yeah, we decided that we had to have some way of rating them. So what we did is we devised a system of, we felt that a 5 was an average racehorse, right in the middle. A 6 was a horse that was trainable for us, Simon, but we didn't want to spend our money on him. We'd like you to buy him and give it to us because he was dangerously close, A 7 was a buy. A horse that made the scale on a 7 would absolutely be one that we would purchase. An 8 would be a horse that we would just be head over heels on. We would go after with a vengeance. And a 9, we give up your firstborn, your house mortgage, your college fund, everything to get a 9, and I never did see a 10. So, when they got into that 8 or 9, Winning Colors was an 8, for example. Grand Canyon was an 8. Land of Lucy was an 8. So when you got into those 8s, once I told the Gene Kleins or the Bob Lewises or Bill Youngs of the world that this is an 8, those were horses that they said, okay, get your seatbelt fastened, here we go.
What constitutes an 8? What were the parameters you were looking for?
The horse has to balance. And then there's the 5 non-negotiables. I'll give you one, for example. I never buy a horse that's back in his knee, calf kneed. If I walk out and he's straight, back in his knee, absolutely he's going to be eliminated immediately. I just say next, and we go on to the next one, because you're looking at $4,000 or $5,000 a year. You don't have to buy a horse with any. And yet, if you start opening that pedigree page and look at that catalog, you start looking at him and you say, well, maybe he's not so bad after all. He might be straight in his knee. He's not back, when in reality he is. I've never had any luck with those. So you get into that bad-footed horses are non-negotiable. So you make those bam, 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 bam checks. You now start looking at the balance, and I'll give you one clue. At this stage of my life, hell with it, I'll throw it out there. The neck is the key to all racehorses.
Really?
You show me a horse that can run, and he will have a great neck, and it'll be positioned on his withers properly, and it'll have some length to it. I told Cordero when we were living together early on in my career, I said, Angel, you're getting on a lot of 2-year-olds. I said, let me give you a little pointer. I said, you get on those things in the morning, you take the average whip, the stick that you have, and you put it right in front of your saddle, and you tip it right down in line with his neck. If that stick goes between his ears and sticks out and goes beyond his ears, just get off and tell him you got to go get something else done. I says, because that one is not going to run.
You mentioned Winning Colors. She obviously had a great neck. She was an 8, and probably one of the greatest fillies of all time. You've been called many times a great trainer of fillies, and I think it was fitting that she was your first Derby winner. That was a filly.
Well, an interesting thing we're talking about here is at Keeneland in the sales barns, all of you that have been there or during the race meet, the wall, the concrete wall, outer wall
around the barn,
is 4 foot high.
Okay.
And winning colors happened to be an end, and I called for that consignment. And she came out of the end stall, and now she's walking. I'm standing out in the yard, and she's walking down with just all I can see is from the top of the wall up. I can see her neck, her wither, her hip. And I remember just like yesterday, turned to Jeff and I say, if this heifer walks out here and those front legs are in line, this is something. I said, look at the wither and the balance of this filly. She come around the gap, walked right at me and stopped her, and I said, put her up. Don Setcher said, don't you like her? I said, she's okay. I turned to Jeff, I said, whew. I said, she made my knees buckle.
Do you think people have ever seen you bidding in the sale ring?
I got to the point where after a while I thought it was probably better to be a little bit discreet. And so we set up, I had my seat and then my spotter, the same guy every sale. And so we'd have different signals. And
I remember this one.
Oh yeah.
Foot.
Well, we had
you.
different ones here. We would change them up just like a third base coach would do on a steel sign or something. But if a horse came in, I would take out my pen and I would just have it in my hand. That meant that lot I'm interested in. But then I'd put the pen away. But then my spotter knew that we were interested. I always sat on the aisle. So if I wanted to start on the bid, I would be in. My foot would be on the aisle and I'd be in. I'd bring it back and I'd stop. I'd cross my legs, like that. Then I'd come back out in the aisle again, I'd be in. I'd come back like that. And I'd be talking to somebody while I'm doing it. I'd be talking to the guy next to me, not paying, and just be in all the time.
Son Jeff a lot. We haven't touched on him. He's one of many assistants, a long line of assistants that you've produced. Let's start with him. Major integral part of the operation, correct, in the early days? Big time.
I don't think our legacy, if there is such a thing, would be complete without his input. He not only he never worked for anybody but me, of course, but he had a great feel for it. The thing that he brought to the table that a lot of people don't know, he was almost genius, and it's difficult for me to make that purple reference because he is my only son, but he was almost genius at reading the condition book and placing a horse. And he did that, me with the number of horses, we grew big overnight, as you know, and he would come with those condition books and he'd say, Dad, this horse fits here, we need to get that one on a plane, he's going to be double tough in that. And he really read the condition book well. In fact, Mike Lakow, the racing secretary at Belmont, told me he had never encountered anybody that saw it as quickly and read it like he, and every time it come out, he said, I used to dread it because the phone would ring and Jeff would say, Mike, turn to page 36. You can't write that race because that filly's going to get in at 109 and the one that shouldn't gets in at 118. Now go to page 42. You got a mistake there on that race. He said he'd make about 6 or 7 corrections in the book. And he said the amazing thing was every one of them was right. I thought his career was really going in the right direction.
It was going in the right direction until, unfortunately, that tragic accident with Tabasco Cat. Yeah. That must have been a major blow to you.
It was. I don't think unless you've ever been in that position, you can realize what that does. I mean, we went from the pinnacle. I think we'd won something like 12, 13, 14 world championships in a row and money earned and so stakes winners and so forth. And then all of a sudden that changed everything overnight. Jeff, of course, has been documented, was in a coma for over a month and had to recover, was almost 5 years in rehab.
Were you there when it happened, the accident?
Oh yeah, I was standing, I was less than 20 feet away. We had come back to the barn, and we had both been on our saddle horses, and Tabasco Cat was our #1 prospect for the Kentucky Derby and the Triple Crown in general. And he was a high-feeling, really high-energy horse. And he had gone down in the middle wash rack at Santa Anita there on that, as you know, Simon, that hard pan road out in front of Santa Anita. And they slipped the bridle off him and put the halter on ready to give him a bath. And he just playfully swung back and it was loose. Had nothing on him at all. And he ran down at the end of the road, circled a couple times, and here he come. He come down that hard pan road just as hard as one could run, probably going 35, 40 miles an hour. And Jeff stepped out, and I know Jeff, he was too good a horseman to think that he could stop him. He wasn't going to stop him. He was going to try to contain him in that area until we caught him, like anybody would. And like you meet somebody in the hallway, you know, and you're going to pass, and you both step the same way, you veer the same way. That's exactly what happened. He stepped out of the way of Tabasco Cat. Tabasco Cat veered the same direction to get past him, and he caught him just shoulder high. And like you see those wide receivers in football getting caught, you know, vulnerable up there when they catch a pass and it flips them. Tabasco Cat just flipped him right in the air, and he landed on the hard pan road right on the back of his head, and of course was unconscious.
Does he miss the horse business, Jay?
I think he misses it, but I think he realizes, you know, the limitations. He follows it carefully and everything. His mind's wonderful. He can tell you who was running fifth in the 1988 Kentucky Derby and what the half-mile fraction was. Yeah, that part, he's fine. His equilibrium, of course, is still not good.
I think it's a tribute to you that you could continue, you know, you could take Tabasco Cat from what he did to your son, be it an accident, and then developing into the horse he was. How was that experience, knowing that your son's sick, he's in a coma, and meanwhile you got to train this horse and prepare him for a Triple Crown?
I pulled them all together, and I said, you know, we're going to do the right thing here. Instead of, you know, downplaying this thing and making him the victim, meaning Tabasco Cat, we're going to pull together and see if we can make him the best possible horse that we can. I said, let's see if we can't just win the whole damn thing with him. I said, Jeff would want it that way, I want it that way, and we made a complete 360 and turned it around in the barn, and we got to going. And you know, in my heart to this day, Simon, I believe that if the horse next to him in the Kentucky Derby wouldn't have acted up in the gate, and he was high-strung, Tabasco Cat, and he threw a little wing ding. When the other horse hit the front of the gate, he threw a little one. He got away bad, and of course, the Hollywood script didn't play out. He runs, I think, fifth in the Kentucky Derby, but then comes back and wins the Preakness and wins the Belmont.
Pat Day and Tabasco Cat are in front with 100 yards to come, and here's the wire, and Tabasco Cat will prevail to win the 126th Belmont.
You transformed the way trainers handled their stables. You had satellite operations. Horses could get on a plane. They could have the same feed, the same care. People didn't have to travel with the horse. I mean, you were the CEO of a horse racing industry. I mean, you were a businessman, but you had horsemanship skills as well. Where did all that come from? I mean, you really transformed the industry, and Todd's doing the same thing now, Todd Pledge.
All of my guys are. Yeah. They bought into the system. You know, the thing about it is we're such a tradition-bound sport. But from my coaching background, I knew that I could not oversee every little detail as we grew. So now you have to delegate, but you don't delegate without some discipline and authority. Like I like to tell people, they say, how do you run your operation? I say, we have 5 minutes of democracy in the morning, and that's it. and then we take off, and I take over. That's right, dictatorship after that.
Most satisfying win ever?
Wow, that's a tough question. You know, I thought when Winning Colors won the Derby, you know, everybody, you know, would point to that, and it was satisfying, and it was a thrill. I think the two others stood out, though. I think when Grindstone with Jerry Bailey won the Kentucky Derby for my dear friend W.T. Young, that was the most emotional I ever got. I waited for him on the grass course going to the coveted circle, so to speak, and when we embraced and said some things personally to each other, that was probably the most, you know, gratifying thing that ever happened to me. And then again, when we won the Classic at Gulfstream Park with Cat Thief, which was a complete upset, and yet I had talked him into running when all of his advisors had told him not to.
Cat Thief don't miss her, but Cat Thief coming down to the line, and Cat Thief has won it by 1 length. And there is Cat Thief. The victory goes to trainer D. Wayne Lukas.
That was a great win also, but There's been so many of them that, you know, you go back and they're all special, but those jump off the page a little bit for me.
Best training job ever. Would that be charismatic? Bear in mind, I mean, he was a $50,000 claimer, and 4 months later, he's winning the Kentucky Derby.
It's going to be one of three. It's going to be him, charismatic. It's going to be him, Lady's Secret, or Tabasco Cat, probably.
Really?
Tabasco Cat, you know, was such a high energy horse and everything. To channel all that energy and get those classic wins with him, I think was probably something that was difficult to do. Lady's Secret winning, what, 11 Grade 1s in 1 year. I mean, that you got to be paying attention, I think, to get that done. And then charismatic, you know, I couldn't break 50 and a half mile work, and we just wouldn't give up on him, mainly because of Bob and Beverly Lewis, but we just wouldn't give up on him, And like you say, we ran him for claim, not once, but twice. And suddenly to win the Derby and the Preakness, and probably with a little bit better judgment in the Belmont, would have won all three of them. He could have done it.
Worst training job ever. How about that?
Capote. Easy.
Really?
Easy.
Really?
Easy.
You didn't hesitate at all?
Yeah, not at all. That one bothers me, eats on me. I'd like to turn the page on that, but as a horse trainer, you can't. Capote was 2-year-old champion. He won, you know, he won the Breeders' Cup, beat Gulch, which I had also. Beat Gulch in the Breeders' Cup, which was the reigning leader at the time, voted 2-year-old champion. Between the 2-year-old Breeders' Cup and the Kentucky Derby. And again, you got to understand that a young trainer is passionate to get back. Now you're looking at a 2-year-old champion, which everybody has got the future book favorite for the Kentucky Derby. He got deathly sick. Got very, very sick, lost weight, and then towards spring, he physically started to look good. And I totally misread this horse. I did not have him ready, and my friend in later years, Woody Stevens, told me that if I won the Derby with that horse, he'd quit, and he was dead right. But I was in denial. I thought I had him where I could maybe, you know, bring him back, and I knew it was going to be on that day, if ever. And yet I totally misread him, and I think I did a terrible job. I made him a 2-year-old champion, his plaque's on the wall, but in hindsight, he should have never been in the Derby. He actually ran last.
How would you like your legacy to be portrayed in 50 years from now?
I think our legacy is going to be that we've turned out some really good people. You see, one of the things and one of the jealousies and animosities that I felt when I first came over from the quarter horses especially was that we were a corporate deal, because we grew and we, like you had mentioned earlier, you know, we did things differently and everything, and so the knock was that, well, we're just overwhelming them with numbers and there's no horsemanship. Well, I think now we put that to rest. I think that with these young assistants out there who are also doing much of that, there was some horsemanship. And I think if I were to be remembered, I would like at least to have the respect that the people in the industry said, you know, he did it differently, but he was damn sure okay as a horseman, you know, that there was some horsemanship involved. Because I don't think you get 24 world champions in one breed and 23 in another being a corporate head. If you were, I think that Bill Gates better turn his business over and start doing something different.
Well, I just want to say I think you made a big difference to me, Wayne. Just the little time we've had sitting here, this interview could go on for hours and hours.
Oh, it's fun to talk about.
I just want to thank you for letting us into your house. And,
thank you.
It's been a great interview. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
When Dwayne Lukas was at the height of his powers, he had divisions all around the country. You could walk to any backside where there was a Lukas barn and you would not barn number. You could find it very simply by looking at the newest landscape barn. Whenever a Lukas barn arrived on a backside anywhere in America, they brought in trees and reshaped the entire area, and every assistant was expected to wear a jacket and tie to the paddock. Dwayne Lukas, more than anyone else, realized there's a lot of little steps that must be taken before you go to the big stage in horse racing. I'm Todd Schrupp. Thank you for joining us on Legends.